Your apartment is supposed to be your sanctuary, the one place where you can lock the door, draw the blinds, and feel completely safe. It's your space, your home. But what happens when that safety is an illusion? What happens when you realize that locks can be picked, walls can be breached, and the person living next door might not be who you think they are? Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories from people who discovered that their apartments, their homes, were never truly safe at all. These aren't paranormal encounters or urban legends. These are documented cases, police reports, restraining orders, evidence that some of the most disturbing things that can happen to a person happen in the place they're supposed to feel most protected. Let's begin. Our first story comes from Ashley Morrison, a 28-year-old graphic designer who moved into a studio apartment in Portland, Oregon, in August 2019. The apartment was perfect for her budget. Top floor of a 3-story building, good natural light, quiet neighbors. The building was older, built in the 1960s, but it had been renovated and the landlord seemed responsible. Ashley lived there for 3 months without incident. She worked from home most days, had a routine, felt comfortable. But in November, things started to feel off. It began with small things. Items moved slightly. A coffee mug she was certain she'd left on the counter would be in the sink. Her laptop would be open when she knew she'd closed it. Books rearranged on her shelf. At first, Ashley assumed she was being forgetful, working long hours, stressed about deadlines. We all have moments where we question our own memory, but then she started noticing her food disappearing. Not entire meals, just pieces. A few bites taken from leftovers in the fridge, a missing slice of bread, half a sandwich gone. That couldn't be explained by forgetfulness. Ashley mentioned it to her landlord. He suggested she might have mice. He'd send an exterminator. But Ashley knew it wasn't mice. Mice don't open Tupperware containers. Mice don't use silverware. And mice don't leave handprints on the inside of your bathroom mirror. Ashley discovered the handprint on a Tuesday morning in late November. She'd been blow-drying her hair and the steam had fogged up the mirror. As it cleared, she saw it, a full handprint, slightly smaller than her own, pressed against the glass from the inside. No, wait, not from the inside. That wasn't possible. She wiped it away, heart racing, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. Condensation can create strange effects. Old buildings have weird residue. There had to be an explanation. But that night, Ashley couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and that's when she heard it. Scratching, very faint, coming from above her. Ashley's apartment was on the top floor. There was nothing above her except the roof. The scratching continued. Not random, rhythmic, like someone moving. She called building security. They came up, checked the roof access. It was locked. No one there. They told her it was probably raccoons or birds nesting in the eaves. Ashley wanted to believe them. But 3 days later, she came home from a coffee shop and found her apartment door unlocked. She was certain, absolutely certain, she'd locked it. She always double-checked. Nothing appeared to be stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. But something felt wrong. The air felt different, like someone had just been there. Ashley did what any sensible person would do in 2019. She bought a security camera, one of those small ones that connects to your phone. She set it up facing her front door and the main living area. That night, she went to bed feeling slightly more secure. At least she'd have evidence if something happened. At 3:47 a.m., Ashley's phone buzzed, motion detected. She grabbed her phone, opened the app, and watched the live feed. For a few seconds, nothing. Just her empty apartment, illuminated by the streetlight coming through the window. And then the camera angle shifted slightly. Someone had bumped it. Ashley's blood went cold. Someone was in her apartment, right now, while she was lying in bed just 15 feet away. She could hear them. Faint sounds, careful movements, someone trying very hard to be quiet. Ashley didn't move, didn't breathe. Every instinct told her to stay silent, to pretend she was still asleep, because whoever was in her apartment didn't know she was awake. The sounds moved toward her bedroom. Ashley could see the doorway in the camera feed. A shadow appeared. A figure, small, thin, moving with the careful precision of someone who had done this before. The figure stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, just watching her sleep. Or watching where they thought she was sleeping. Ashley had propped up pillows under her blanket before going to bed, a paranoid precaution that might have just saved her life. The figure finally moved away. Ashley watched on her phone as they went to her refrigerator, took out food, ate it standing in her kitchen. They used her dishes. They drank from her cups. And then, at 4:23 a.m., the figure walked to a small door in Ashley's apartment, a door she'd assumed was a closet and had never opened because it was painted shut. The figure opened it easily and disappeared inside. Ashley waited until 5 a.m., then she ran. She grabbed her keys, her phone, and she left. She didn't even put on shoes. She called 911 from her car. Police arrived within 8 minutes. They cleared the apartment. They checked that small door Ashley had thought was a closet. It wasn't a closet. It was access to a crawl space that ran between the ceiling of the second floor and the floor of Ashley's third-floor apartment. A maintenance space that was supposed to be locked and only accessible from the building's service area. But someone had broken the lock months ago, and someone had been living in that crawl space. Police found a nest of blankets, pillows, food wrappers, and bottles. They found a collection of Ashley's belongings, things she thought she'd lost, a hairbrush, underwear, photographs. They found a notebook, pages and pages of handwritten notes, details about Ashley's routine, what time she left for work, what time she came home, what she ate, what she wore, what TV shows she watched. The handwriting was small, cramped, obsessive. And they found something that made the investigating officers immediately call for backup. A detailed floor plan of Ashley's apartment, with marks indicating where she kept her valuables, where she slept, and a circled date in red marker, December 7th, 2019. That was 4 days away. There was a note next to the date. She won't be alone anymore. The person living in Ashley's crawl space was never found. DNA evidence was collected, but it didn't match anyone in the system. Fingerprints were everywhere, but no hits in the database. Investigators theorized it was a young woman, late teens or early 20s, possibly unhoused, possibly dealing with mental health issues. Someone who had found a way into the building and had been living in the crawl space for at least 2 months. Someone who had been watching Ashley, learning her patterns, planning something. Ashley broke her lease that day. She moved back in with her parents. She's since moved to a different state, to a house, not an apartment, with a security system and no crawl spaces. When I spoke with her for this video, she was still shaken. It's been over 4 years, and she still checks every closet, every door, every space large enough for a person to hide. The worst part, she told me, isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. What was supposed to happen on December 7th. I think about that date constantly. I think about what my life would be like if I hadn't bought that camera, if I hadn't woken up. Sometimes I wonder if she's still out there, if she found someone else to watch, someone who doesn't have a camera. When you move into a new apartment, you inherit more than just the space. You inherit its history, the people who lived there before, the things they left behind. Sometimes you inherit their secrets. Michael Chen moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, New York in March 2020, just as the pandemic was beginning. The timing was terrible for most people, but for Michael, it meant he got a good deal on rent. The apartment had been vacant for 3 months, and the landlord was eager to fill it. The apartment was beautiful. High ceilings, original molding, large windows. It had been recently renovated. Fresh paint, new appliances, refinished floors. Michael didn't think to ask why it had been vacant for so long. He should have. For the first week, everything was perfect. Michael worked from home, like everyone else in March 2020. He unpacked, arranged his furniture, settled into his new life. But then he started receiving mail that wasn't addressed to him. Bills, credit card statements, subscription renewals, all addressed to someone named Robert Alvarez, the previous tenant. Michael did what most people would do. He wrote "Return to Sender" on the envelopes and put them back in the outgoing mail. He assumed Robert had simply forgotten to update his address. But the mail kept coming, and it got stranger. Collection notices, court summons, certified letters from law firms. Whatever Robert Alvarez had been dealing with before he left, it wasn't good. Michael mentioned it to his landlord. The landlord said he'd forward Robert's contact information and have him update his address. But weeks passed and the mail continued. Then Michael received a package. It was large, rectangular, addressed to Robert Alvarez. It had been sitting in the building's package room for 2 days before Michael noticed the address. He should have left it there. He should have contacted his landlord again. But Michael was curious. The package was from a storage facility in New Jersey. It felt like it contained hard drives or files, something substantial. Inside the box were 3 external hard drives, a dozen USB drives, and a letter. The letter was typed, no signature. It read, "Robert, these are the only copies left. I fulfilled my part. You need to disappear like you said you would. If anyone finds these, we're both finished. Destroy them." Michael stared at the letter. His first thought was that he'd stumbled into something illegal. His second thought was that he should call the police. His third thought, the one he acted on, was that he needed to know what was on those drives. Michael plugged one of the drives into his laptop. It was password protected. He tried a few obvious combinations. Nothing worked, but the USB drives weren't protected. The first one contained photos, hundreds of them. They were surveillance photos, taken from a distance. People going about their daily lives, unaware they were being photographed. The second USB drive contained videos, similar content. People filmed through windows, in parking lots, at cafes. The footage was high quality, deliberate. The third USB drive contained documents, names, addresses, social security numbers, bank account information, private details about dozens of people. Michael's hands were shaking. This wasn't just creepy. This was criminal, identity theft, stalking, possibly worse, and it had all belonged to the person who lived in his apartment before him. Michael immediately called the police. He explained what he'd found. Officers arrived within an hour. They confiscated the hard drives, the USB drives, and the letter. They also asked Michael a lot of questions about Robert Alvarez. But here's what made this story go from disturbing to absolutely terrifying. The detective handling the case pulled Michael aside and told him something that wasn't in any official report, something that had been kept quiet. Robert Alvarez hadn't just moved out of Michael's apartment. He disappeared. On December 18th, 2019, 3 months before Michael moved in, neighbors had reported a disturbance in the apartment. Shouting, sounds of a struggle. Then silence. When police arrived, the apartment door was open. There were signs of a fight, overturned furniture, broken glass, blood on the kitchen floor, but no Robert Alvarez. His car was still in the parking garage. His wallet was on the counter. His phone was smashed on the floor. Robert Alvarez had vanished from his own apartment. The case was investigated as a possible homicide, but without a body, without witnesses, and without any leads, it eventually went cold. The landlord had the apartment cleaned, renovated, and relisted, and Michael had moved into a crime scene. The contents of those hard drives led to a larger investigation. Turns out Robert Alvarez had been involved in an identity theft ring. The surveillance photos, the personal information, it was all part of an operation, and someone had wanted it stopped. Someone who might have killed Robert to do it. The detective advised Michael to install additional locks, to get a security system, to be careful, because whoever had come for Robert might not know that Robert was gone. They might not know that someone new was living in the apartment. They might come back. Michael lived in that apartment for 7 more months. He installed 3 deadbolts, a chain lock, and a security camera. He slept with a baseball bat next to his bed. Nothing ever happened. No one ever came. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that the same person who had been photographed in those surveillance images, whoever had discovered what Robert was doing, might be keeping an eye on the apartment, making sure no one else continued what Robert had started. Michael moved out in October 2020. He now lives in a different borough, in a building with 24-hour doorman service. The case of Robert Alvarez's disappearance remains unsolved. The identity theft ring investigation led to several arrests, but no one was ever charged with Robert's presumed murder. And the apartment. According to public records, it's been rented 3 more times since Michael left. The current tenant has been there for 6 months. I wonder if they know what happened in their home. I wonder if they've received any strange packages. Our final story is about what you can't hear, about what soundproof walls were designed to hide, and about the moment when someone discovered that those walls weren't quite soundproof enough. Jessica Ramirez moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas in January 2021. She was a graduate student studying psychology, and she'd chosen the apartment specifically because the building was advertised as luxury living with superior sound insulation. After living in a noisy college dorm for 4 years, Jessica was willing to pay extra for quiet. The apartment delivered on that promise. She could barely hear her neighbors. No footsteps from above. No TV noise from next door. Perfect. Jessica's next-door neighbor was a man named Trevor. mid-30s, worked in tech, kept to himself. They'd exchanged maybe 10 words total in the hallway. Pleasant enough, but not friendly. Jessica didn't think much about Trevor until late February. She was studying one evening when she heard knocking. Not on her door, on the wall. The shared wall between her apartment and Trevor's. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. Jessica turned down her music, listened. Nothing. She went back to studying. 5 minutes later, knock, knock, knock. This time followed by something else. A scraping sound, like nails on the other side of the wall. Jessica approached the wall, put her ear against it. The scratching continued. Then it stopped. Then it started again. Pattern, not random. 3 knocks, 3 scratches. Pause. Repeat. Jessica knocked back, just once. A response to see if Trevor would acknowledge he was making noise. The sounds stopped immediately, and they didn't resume that night. But the next evening the knocking returned, same time. Around 9 p.m., same pattern. 3 knocks, 3 scratches. Pause. This went on for a week, every night at 9 p.m. Jessica thought about confronting Trevor, but something held her back. The knocking didn't sound aggressive. It sounded desperate. On March 4th, the pattern changed. The knocking was faster, more urgent, and there were new sounds. Thumping, like someone hitting the wall with their palm or their fist. And then, very faintly, Jessica heard something that made her blood run cold. A voice, screaming, so muffled by the soundproof walls that Jessica couldn't make out words. Just the tone. Terrified. Begging. Jessica ran to her door, looked through the peephole. Trevor's door was closed. The hallway was empty. She called building security. "I think something's wrong next door. I hear shouting. Someone sounds hurt." Security came up, knocked on Trevor's door. He answered after a minute, looking annoyed. Claimed he'd been watching TV, volume might have been up. Apologized for the noise. Security looked at Jessica like she'd wasted their time. But Jessica knew what she'd heard. That wasn't a TV. That was a person, a woman, in distress. She called her friend Rachel, a law student, explained the situation. Rachel's advice was clear. If you genuinely think someone's in danger, call the police. If they do a wellness check and nothing's wrong, fine. But if something is wrong and you didn't act... Jessica called 911. 2 officers arrived. Jessica explained what she'd heard. They knocked on Trevor's door. Trevor answered again, this time more irritated. He insisted he lived alone, insisted nothing was wrong. He allowed the officers inside to look around. They found nothing unusual. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, kitchen, living room. All normal. The officers left, but one of them gave Jessica his card, told her to call if she heard anything else. Trevor avoided Jessica after that. Wouldn't make eye contact in the hallway, wouldn't respond to her greetings. And the knocking stopped. For 3 weeks, silence. Jessica almost convinced herself she'd overreacted. Maybe it had been a TV. Maybe Trevor had a girlfriend over and they'd been arguing. Maybe Jessica had let her psychology studies about abusive relationships make her paranoid. But on March 29th, Jessica came home from class and found a note slipped under her door. The note was written in shaky handwriting. It said, "He knows you called the police. He moved me to the storage unit in the garage. I don't know how long I've been here. Please help. I don't know if this will reach you. I found this paper in a box. My name is Amy. Please." Jessica's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the note. She called 911 immediately. This time, police didn't just knock. They came with a warrant based on the note. They searched Trevor's apartment thoroughly. In his bedroom closet, behind a false wall, they found a phone. Not Trevor's phone. A phone that had been used to send dozens of messages to Trevor's number. Messages begging to be let go. Messages that were never answered. And in the building's basement parking garage, in a storage unit registered to Trevor under a different name, they found Amy Martinez. Amy was 23 years old. She'd been missing for 6 weeks. She'd met Trevor on a dating app. Their third date had been at his apartment. She never left. Trevor had drugged her, held her in his apartment for a week, soundproof walls muffling her screams. When police came the first time, he'd hidden her in a closet, taped her mouth shut, told her if she made a sound, he'd kill her. After Jessica called the police the second time, Trevor had moved Amy to the storage unit at 3 a.m. He'd been planning to move her again, somewhere permanent, but Amy had found a scrap of paper in a box, written the note, and somehow managed to slip it under Jessica's door during the brief moment Trevor had brought her up to transfer her to his car. Amy was found dehydrated, malnourished, and traumatized, but alive, because Jessica trusted her instincts. Because she heard something that soundproof walls almost hid. Because she didn't let herself be convinced she was overreacting. Trevor Hutchinson was arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. During the investigation, police discovered that Amy wasn't Trevor's first victim. They found evidence linking him to 2 other missing persons cases from different cities. Those investigations are ongoing. Jessica moved out of the apartment the following week. She finished her degree online from her parents' house. She's now a licensed therapist who specializes in trauma recovery. She's also an advocate for trusting your instincts, especially when it comes to domestic violence and abduction situations. When I spoke with her, she wanted to make one thing clear. If you think something's wrong, don't convince yourself you're being paranoid. Don't worry about seeming dramatic. I almost talked myself out of calling the police because I didn't want to be that neighbor who overreacts. If I had listened to that voice, if I'd convinced myself it was nothing, Amy would be dead. Trust what you hear. Trust what you feel, even if soundproof walls try to hide the truth. 3 apartments, 3 people who discovered that the place they called home was hiding something terrible. Ashley, who learned that someone had been living in her walls, watching her, planning something horrific. Michael, who moved into an apartment where the previous tenant had vanished and where danger might still be lurking. And Jessica, who heard what soundproof walls were designed to hide and saved a life because she trusted her instincts. These stories have something important in common. They all involved people who sensed something was wrong and took action. Ashley bought a camera. Michael called the police. Jessica didn't ignore what she heard. These 3 people got out. They're safe now. But they live with the knowledge of what almost happened. What could have happened if they'd ignored the warning signs for even a little bit longer. Your home should be your sanctuary. If it's not, there's no shame in leaving. There's only survival. Thank you for watching. If you have your own apartment horror story, something that made you realize your home wasn't safe, you can share it in the comments or submit it anonymously through mail in the description. Stay aware, stay safe, and remember, locks are only as good as the people who don't have a key.